Welcome everyone. We're going to continue with our invertebrates. Part 2 of our invertebrates chapter are going to be the Lophotrochozoans. The ones that we're going to cover today include the phylum Platyhelminthes, the phylum Cindermata, that actually should read Cindermata right here, we're going to skip the Ectoprocta and the Brachiopoda, and then we're going to cover the phylum Mollusca and Annelida. So in our phylogenetic tree, we are now in the clade bilateria, so all of our animals are going to have bilateral symmetry, and that also means they're going to be triploblasts. Before we start with our Platyhelminthes and an introduction to the Lophotrochozoan, I need to point out that I forgot something the last time. Under the Cnidaria, which was the last thing we covered, so I'm going to bring up our course pack right here. The last thing that we talked about was the phylum Cnidaria. Here we go. And under body structure and function, we went over the gastrovascular cavity. We said they didn't have a respiratory or a circulatory system. And under notable structures, we talked about tentacles. But one thing that I neglected to talk about were nematocysts. So back to our slide here. Many of you all know that if you step on a jellyfish at the beach, you can get stung. And so in the tentacles, there are cells that line the surface of the tentacles, and they have a specialized organelle called, the cells themselves are called cnidocytes, and they have organelles that produce these stinging threads. Nematocysts are the organelles that produce the stinging threads, and the stinging threads that come out can inject themselves into the body walls of their prey, paralyzing them, and that is what makes it easier for them to grab them and ingest them. So nematocysts is something that you should associate with the phylum Cnidaria. All right, back to our Lophotrochozoa. So I have an introductory slide about the Lophotrochozoa, and we can take a few notes about this clade. I don't have room in your course pack for this, but one thing I want to point out is that on page 90 in your lecture course packs, when we introduced the three major clades within bilateria, one of our class members had asked, what do we need to know about each of these? So we can use this space right here to fill in some extra notes about this clade. All right, so in the clade Lophotrochozoa, since this clade is within the bilateria, all members are going to be bilateral triploblasts. Most of them will also be protostomes, which means the mouth develops first from the blastopore. There is a large body plan diversity within this clade. Lophotrochozoa actually has the greatest body plan diversity, not species diversity, but body plan diversity. What that means is they have a lot of different types of body plans. So members within the Lophotrochozoa, as I've said, most are protostomes. The ones we'll be talking about today are protostomes, but some can be deuterostomes, and some have an unclear development type where scientists are not sure whether they're protostomes or deuterostomes. And some phyla are acoelomates, some phyla are pseudocoelomates, and then other phyla are coelomates. So a coelomate, just to remind you all, is an animal that has a true internal body cavity that is fully lined by mesoderm tissue. Acoelomates lack that body cavity, but they do have mesoderm tissue, and pseudocoelomates have a partial or sort of a body cavity, but it's only partially lined by mesoderm tissue. And so within the Lophotrochozoa, there are 18 different phyla. And again, the ones that we'll be talking about today are the Platyhelminthes, Cindermata, Annelids, and Mollusca. So since all are bilateral triploblasts and protostomes, we can go back to our chart and fill in the information here. So in the clade Lophotrochozoa, actually, let's fill this in for all bilateral animals. Everything within this clade bilateria is going to be a bilateral triploblast. And so everything all the way down will also be bilateral triploblasts. Now that we're in the category of bilateral triploblasts, we can fill in the information about the type of body cavity they have and the type of development. So within the clade Lophotrochozoa, I mentioned that most of them that we're going to be talking about are protostomes. So our code for that is PS. We're not going to be doing the ectoprocta or the brachiopoda, and the mollusks and annelids are also protostomes. All right, so we'll fill these in after we cover the information about these 4 phyla. All right, some takeaway messages from the clade Lophotrochozoa. As I had mentioned before, they are all bilateral triploblasts, and most are protostomes. But they have the highest level of body plan diversity amongst these 3 different subclades within Bilateria. Ooh. Body plan diversity. Sorry, that is a mistake. And let's see, what else am I missing here? So we're going to have acoelomates, coelomates, and pseudocoelomates. And the phyla that we're going to talk about that belong to Lophotrochozoa include the Platyplates. The flatworms belong to the phylum Platyhelminthes. The mollusks, or the Cindermata, the mollusca, and the annelids, or the phylum Annelida. All right, so that is our background on the clade Lophotrochozoa. Now we can continue with our current lecture outline and start talking about the clade, or the phylum Platyhelminthes. The common name for all members of this phylum are the flatworms. And there are 20,000 species within this phylum. They are flat, and one of the reasons they're flat is because they are acoelomates. So that means they have no body cavity in their mesoderm tissue. There are 3 taxonomic groups. We're not going to memorize the official class names, just the general names. We've got the planaria, which are the free-living flatworms, the flukes, and the tapeworms. Both flukes and tapeworms can be parasitic, but flukes can go through free-living and parasitic stages, whereas tapeworms are always parasitic. So in terms of lifestyle and reproduction, if there are differences between groups within a phylum, you should note those differences in your lecture outlines. So for lifestyle and reproduction, our species can undergo sexual reproduction, but some of them do have asexual reproduction. Our example will be the planaria. They can reproduce asexually by something called fission. The ones that do undergo sexual reproduction are hermaphroditic, which means there are not separate male or female sexes. They can be free-living or parasitic. Specifically, our planaria are going to be free-living. Our tapeworms are going to be parasitic. And our flukes are going to be both. They have a life cycle that includes both stages. All right, a little bit more information on the lifestyle, ecology, and reproduction, and the bodies of these types of flatworms can be found on the next slide. So here's a picture of our planaria. I'm really sad you all won't be in lab. I always love to draw the planaria. They have like this triangle-shaped head with eye spots and this cute little body, and they look like that under the microscope, and we can see them swimming around. So the planaria are our free-living flatworms. They're aquatic, found in both marine and freshwater environments, and these are the ones that can reproduce asexually by fission. So if there is a mode of asexual reproduction for a phylum, you should be able to note that. Our second group, the flukes or the trematodes, are parasitic. And so if they're parasitic, that means they're not going to be marine or freshwater. That means they live inside another animal. In this case, the animals would be vertebrate hosts. And their larval stage can be free-living and be found in aquatic environments. Tapeworms are a parasitic group of flatworms. All tapeworms are vertebrate parasites. The larva can be lodged or encysted into the muscle tissue. So this is one reason why it's really important to fully cook meat like pork, because if there's tapeworm larvae in the center of that meat, which is the muscle tissue, you have to make sure that that gets cooked, or you could ingest those eggs and get a tapeworm infection. Our tapeworms are going to be different than our free-living flatworms in terms of their body structure and reproduction. I will get into that a little more in the next slide. They don't have a digestive system because they suck the nutrients from our digestive system. And they do reproduce sexually and are hermaphroditic. So here is a picture showing the body structure of a flatworm. Because they're so thin and flat, organisms that are very thin and flat have a large surface area to volume ratio. And so they don't need a circulatory or respiratory system because most of their nutrient and gas exchange can just occur by diffusion. So animals that are thin and flat will often be able to survive without these circulatory or respiratory systems. Like the Cnidaria, our free-living flatworms have a gastrovascular cavity with one opening, the mouth/anus. So that's similar to the phylum Cnidaria, but in our parasitic flatworms, like the tapeworms, they don't need that gastrovascular cavity because they attach themselves to the intestinal lining of their vertebrate hosts through these hooks, and they obtain those nutrients through the suckers. So they absorb their nutrients rather than ingest them. So there's no digestive system in the parasitic flatworms. One feature, this isn't in your study guide, but it could be, the segments of a flatworm, well, they're not true segments, they're reproductive segments. These segments in a flatworm are just packed with fertilized eggs. And so if these eggs shed, then a lot of transmission can occur. And because they don't require obtaining their own food, they also lack the type of sensory equipment that's found in the free-living flatworm. And so as we evolve through the different lineages of the animal kingdom, we're going to start to see more developed sensory equipment. Here in the free-living flatworm, we have ganglia, which are like clusters of neurons, eye spots, and some nerve cords. Ventral nerve cords means that they run on like the belly side of the animal. And this sensory equipment is lacking in the parasitic, not found in the parasitic flatworms because of evolutionary loss. They simply don't need this sensory equipment since they live inside a vertebrate host. All right, now we're moving on to the phylum Cindermata. The phylum Cindermata is a pseudocoelomate. So that means they have a coelom partially lined by mesoderm tissue. There are 2,900 species within the phylum Cindermata. There are two different groups that are discussed in your textbook, but we're going to just talk about the rotifers. So rotifers are found in almost all types of environments. They can be found in terrestrial environments, but there's still usually some water associated with it. So damp soil environments and aquatic environments like freshwater and marine ecosystems will have rotifers. They are I don't want to say they're filter feeders. They do draw in prey through this ciliated crown. We'll see that in a moment. And so they can swim and move around. And they ingest their food into a stomach. So they have a complete digestive system that goes all the way from mouth to anus. And I want to highlight this right here because this is the first time we're seeing a full digestive tract. Highlight. This is our first member of the animal kingdom with a complete digestive system that goes all the way from mouth to anus. Whenever we say alimentary canal, that also just means that complete digestive tube. Before we watch our video, I want to point out one other thing about the reproduction in rotifers. There are some species of rotifers that will do sexual reproduction, but as a whole, it's a very female-dominated phylum, and there are many rotifers that can reproduce asexually through a process called parthenogenesis. And this is an asexual reproduction mechanism by which females can reproduce or generate other females from an unfertilized egg. All right, let's watch that video. I'm gonna bring it up here on YouTube and we're gonna watch our first animal capture food. So cool. And you can see the stomach churning right there. These are the ciliated crowns. It's going after stuff. We're losing sight of it a little bit, but it's going to eat something, and we'll see it disappear in its stomach. Oh, there it is. It gobbled it up and is now going to digest it in its stomach. Very cool. All right. And so now as we continue all of our animal phyla that we discuss from here on out, we'll have a complete digestive tract from mouth to anus. We'll see some other organs along the way. Here we have a stomach, but as you know in humans, we have more organs like a small intestine and a large intestine. So as we go through, we'll see that digestive system or that alimentary canal develop other types of organs to help with that process of digestion. All right, our third phylum today is Mollusca. Mollusca are coelomates, so they have body cavities lined with mesoderm tissue. And our phyla that are coelomates, these are, because they have body cavities fully lined by mesoderm tissue, we're going to see a lot more internal organs in these species. Our phylum Mollusca is very diverse. It has the most species out of any of the Lophotrochozoa phyla that we'll be talking about today. And there are 8 different classes, and we're going to talk about 4 of them. The chitons, bivalves, gastropods, and cephalopods. So our gastropods and cephalopods will have heads. This is our snails and the other thing, snails and slugs, and then cephalopods are octopi and squids. Chitons and bivalves don't have heads, but they'll have shells that protect them. Chitons on one side, bivalves on both sides. What the hell is happening? I'm gonna stop that. Okay. Back to our lecture. So the lifestyle, ecology, and reproduction. All mollusks are free living. We don't have any parasitic examples of mollusks. They're going to be marine, freshwater, and terrestrial. So we'll note the differences as we go through these 4 examples. And most of them will have male-female sexes, though some can be hermaphroditic. All right, so here are our 4 groups. Our chitons are marine species, and they have a dorsal shell, or a shell that's on their back with these 8 plates or plaques. They scrape food off of rocks, and they live in marine ecosystems. So here they are, no shell. Our gastropods include snails and slugs. Snails and slugs are found in all sorts of environments, both aquatic and terrestrial, both marine and freshwater. They have very prominent heads with tentacles, and the snails will have the coiled shell, whereas our slugs don't have that shell. And this is our class where many species are hermaphroditic right here. So no male-female sexes. Individuals produce both egg and sperm gametes. And then we have our bivalves. Bivalves include all of the animals that have shells on the dorsal and the ventral side, so clams, oysters, mussels, etc. There are marine and freshwater species, so they are aquatic, and they don't have a head like the chitons. They can be sessile, but some of them will move. They'll have a foot muscle, so they're either really slow moving, and they are suspension feeders. We're going to show a diagram of what that looks like in the next slide. So one of the most common invasive species in Michigan is actually the zebra mussel. And so zebra mussels are native to Russia, but they are invasive in the Great Lakes area. They're found on the east side of the state along beaches. You can easily cut your foot on a zebra mussel shell. They're the black and white shells. And if they attach themselves to the bottoms of boats or docks or anchors, they can cause a lot of problems. They can also really stick to and attach to pipelines. Remember, sticking or attaching to a surface means they're sessile. And they can block pipelines. So one invasive species in Michigan is a zebra mussel, which is a type of bivalve. Our cephalopods include squids, octopi, and nautiluses. They are all marine species and lack or have a very reduced shell. So all of our other mollusks you have noticed have had shells, so except for the slugs. The cephalopods, cephalo means head or brain or sensory equipment. Cephalopods are known for their very advanced sensory equipment. They not just have a head, but they often have very large developed eyes and highly functional brains. They are predatorial and they capture their prey with their tentacles that they also use for locomotion. And as we'll see in the next slide, cephalopods are going to be distinct from all of the other mollusks in that they have a closed circulatory system, which means their blood vessels form a closed unit. An open circulatory system, on the other hand, will be where the blood vessels are just open to the entire body. So let's move on to those structural features. Most mollusks have that protective shell, some of them don't. They'll have a very soft body, and many or most will have that protective shell. These cephalopods have that reduced or no protective shell. The three main parts we're going to show a bivalve as an example. Three major body parts of mollusks include a foot, which is the muscle that's used for locomotion. The mantle is a tissue layer that drapes over the visceral mass, and it secretes the shell. And then the visceral mass contains the internal organs. There's a complete digestive tube, so there is a complete digestive system. It doesn't say that in words on here, but if you'll notice, there's a mouth, there's an anus, there's a stomach, so our mollusks do have a complete digestive tract from mouth to anus. They have a respiratory system now that includes gills, and most have an open circulatory system that includes a heart, and then open means that the blood vessels are open to the body, and then the fluid just returns to the heart and then is still pumped through those same open blood vessels. So most have that open circulatory system, but our cephalopods are going to be the example that have a closed. So the mollusks are our first circulatory. The mollusks are our first animal phylum that has both a respiratory and a circulatory system. And so now that we see that, we will likely see it amongst all of the animal phyla that we see in the future. All right. Next up, we have the annelids, or these segmented worms. Annelids are truly segmented worms. They're going to be the first of many animal phyla that we'll talk about that display this form of segmentation. Others will be arthropods and chordates. So annelids are coelomates. That means they have body cavities fully lined by mesoderm tissue. And like all of the other Lophotrochons we've talked about, they are protostomes, which means that their mouth develops first. There are 16,500 species, and there are 4 lower groups. So we've got the Arantians and the Sedentarians. These are also known as the polychaetes. And then we have the oligochaetes, which are the leeches and the earthworms. All right, one thing I have noticed is that we have not been talking about the higher level taxonomy. I just want to point out right now that if you use your phylogenetic trees, you can follow along with the higher level taxonomy. So for the phylum Annelid, and for all of the Lophotrochozoans, really it would be Metazoa, Eumetazoa, Bilateria, and then the Lophotrochozoa. That will be the higher level taxonomy for all of the phyla we're talking about today. All right, our annelids, depending on which group we're going to be talking about, can be free-living or parasitic. I'm just going to go ahead and circle the parasitic one right here. Others are free-living. Most of them are found in terrestrial, freshwater, and marine environments, so they're very ubiquitous on our planet. Our individuals are hermaphroditic, which means there's no separate male-female sexes, but they can also reproduce asexually by a process called fragmentation, where they split, and then regeneration, where those fragments that have been split will grow or regenerate into a new living adult animal. So more on the lifestyle, ecology, and reproduction, and also body and structure and function of these 4 groups. So our earthworms are free-living. They're found in all different types of environments, aquatic and terrestrial, and they're called oligochaetes. And what that means, oligo means few, and then chaetes refers to the chaetae. And so each segment of an earthworm, I'm going to just draw this out right here. Let's say this is a segment of an earthworm right here. They have a few bristles coming out of each side. So they have a few bristles. These bristles are called chaetae, and that's why we call them oligochaetes. Leeches have lost those chaetae, so they're really slick and shiny and smooth because they don't have those bristles. Some are free-living, but they are going to be the example of the parasitic group of annelids. Most of them are found in freshwater environments, and again, they don't have chaetae. Our marine annelids are called the polychaetes. So polychaetes means that in a single segment, they have a lot of chaetae. So they look fuzzy or furry or just plain scary, as you'll see here. We've got 2 types of polychaetes. The Arantians are much more fast or mobile, and the Sedentarians tend to be bottom dwellers or live in marine sediments, and you can see all of those chaetae attached to the body of that worm. The segments, because these are all marine or aquatic, the segments have parapodia that the chaetae are attached to. I should have drawn that. The parapodia means false feet, and there are gills, which are used for respiration or gas exchange. So they do have gills which function as a respiratory system. And the parapodia function as in movement or locomotion. All right, so most of our terrestrial or other types of worms, we haven't talked about the respiratory tract of most annelids, but most of them can actually just breathe through their skin. So they won't have a respiratory system because they are fairly moist and can just exchange gas through the surface of their epidermis or their skin. So some common structural, or let's go through the digestive, circulatory, and respiratory systems. They have a complete digestive system that goes from mouth to anus. Along the digestive tube, we also have a crop and a gizzard, which can help grind up a lot of their food particles, which are found in dirt or soil. They have a closed circulatory system. So here you can see all of the different blood vessels. Annelids will have 4 hearts, and a closed circulatory system again means that the blood vessels form a closed circuit. So the cephalopods and the annelids are 2 groups of organisms or animals so far that have closed circulatory systems. All right, no respiratory system except for the polychaetes that have those parapodia containing gills. So there will be gills on the parapodia of the polychaetes. Chaetae are going to be found on the earthworms and the polychaetes, and they lack appendages, so there are no arms or legs attached to annelids. All right. That is all I have for now on annelids. I would like to go back to our body plan chart and fill in the information that we covered today. So our platyhelminthes were acoelomates. Our cindermata, or our rotifers, were pseudocoelomates. And both our mollusks and annelids are coelomates. So next up, in our part 3, we're going to be covering the clade ecdysozoa. Thank you all for joining me today. Take care.